Sometimes when I look at work several years later, let's say 10 years after it's been up, and I notice things and I see things that I hadn't seen before, it makes me happy on one level, because to me it means that the work still has something to give back. Even though I made it and I know everything about it, I like the fact that perhaps I can still learn something from it. But on the other hand, I don't want to be in too like a cringy mode of like, oh, that was just a big failure, and hope that none of the projects I've done have gotten to that particular state. I'm Norie Sato, and I'm an artist. And I make art for a lot of different places and contexts. I was born in Japan, and even though I came to the United States when I was 5, I think that Japaneseness has influenced me in many ways. And one of the ways it has is that I tend not to shout. I tend to be very quiet and I think my work is the same way, that it isn't all about look at me, look at me, look at me, that we try to kind of be part of the world in a much more gentle way, in a way that is strong yet quiet. And I feel like that's the kind of aesthetic that I bring to my work. What I enjoy most about creating my work is kind of thinking about what that piece should be. So the concept is the part that I love generating the most. Partly because it allows me to dream in a way, it's like before I have to get real. The ideas can form and they're super exciting and interesting. And then reality sets in for especially these public art projects, because certain materials are completely not feasible. And other materials don't last long enough. Other materials are too delicate, too common, too this or too that. And so trying to make that concept fit the reality is in some ways exciting, but not as exciting as really being able to kind of dream without that reality. At the Link Light Rail Operations and Maintenance Facility, I worked with Dan Corson, and we worked on the poles that hold up the wires of the train. And we tried to create this field that has a certain amount of presence and magic using the material that was there, which are poles. It's a field of poles, and we wanted to create a certain kind of focus on that, and also a certain amount of delight about what that is. When we go to Climate Pledge Arena to look at the mosaic is much more a self-contained artwork that deals with a certain amount also of forces and trying to kind of think about energy and things like that. But the material itself, because it's also framed and self-contained in a way that is much more recognizable as an artwork. But when you think about those two different ways of the artwork kind of operating in the world, you can see that there's a huge difference between the two. So I think it'll be interesting for folks to kind of see that there is different consideration, but I'm always thinking about how does it energize the place around it, and how does it make people focus on some aspect of our world or our human, something they wouldn't necessarily think about or focus on in their lives otherwise. If you were to look at my work over time, you would probably notice that there's no particular style, no particular material. It really varies from project to project. And what I like to think about as the through line is the way I think about it and the way I work which is to bring the specifics of the place into the work itself and to make something that has meaning for everyone at different levels. So for some people, some things will be very visible, but for other people, they may never see that aspect of the work. And so I try to make pieces that have a certain sense of layering and depth of various levels of engaging people in the ideas themselves. And so the way it looks, which I think is something related to style. People like to think of style as, okay, I can recognize this person's work because of the certain way it looks and the certain way the materials are used or whatever. And I really admire that, and I think it's really an important aspect of how we as artists think. And so in the studio, I might be a lot more narrow in how that works because I'm not worried as much about the external factors. But in my public artwork, I really do think about that kind of intersection between what I'm interested in as an artist and what the place and the function really is. And that does shift and change.